In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to draft the basic skirt block. Here are the items that you're going to need. You're going to need a piece of drafting paper that is 70 centimeters by 70 centimeters. It could be larger than that, but this is the minimum size that you're going to need. You're going to need your drafting tools, beginning with a mechanical pencil that is 0.5 lead, a good eraser, one of the light technical erasers, a pair of paper scissors, and your L square, the hip curve or French curve, and a grid ruler. In this case, it would be great for you to have a metric grid ruler because the instructions and the measurements that are given you in the instructions are metric. You'll also need to download the instructions for this, for the basic skirt block, and it's on the Moodle site. There's basically 2 pages. You'll notice that in the one column there are body measurements, and then there are actual directions. On the second page, you'll find the actual diagram for the blocks that we're going to be drafting. And again, a set of instructions that correlate to the ones provided in the first page. So you need to gather all this equipment in order to start. The 2 measurements that we're going to be needing would be the waist circumference and the hip circumference measurements for the skirt block. I have highlighted these 2 measurements. The waist circumference given is 68 centimeters and the hip circumference provided is 94 centimeters. So I'm going to begin, but I'm not going to be using the mechanical pencil. I'm going to be drafting with a Sharpie because you'll be able to see it better in this video. To begin with, we're going to mark a point at our upper left-hand corner of the drafting paper. This is point A. And what I'm going to do is I am going to square down and across from this point. So I am going to square down 60 centimeters, and I am also going to square across as long as I can. So I'm going to continue this line across my drafting paper. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, and I'm going to use the instructions on the first page. You should be looking at the diagram as you draft each step. So we're going to draft from point A to point B the hip depth, which is 18.6 centimeters. So we're going to measure down our line 18.6 centimeters. And that is point B. And then A to C is 59 centimeters. So I am going to mark C here at the bottom. Now what we're going to do is, I'm going to pull my piece of paper down a bit. We are going to go and draft the waistline. B is the hip line, and I can actually at this point square that across. When you're using your L ruler, you need to be really precise and ensure that your edge lines up with your line exactly, because if you're slightly tilted, you're no longer going to be drawing a parallel line, and it's no longer going to be square to the first one. So make sure that you're really accurate. I'm going to draft the hip line all the way across. So I'm just going to mark this and label it hip line. You can do that as well. Now this first line here that we've drafted from A to C is the actual center back of the skirt. So I'm going to identify that with the initials CB for center back. So obviously we're drafting the back of the skirt. Getting back to the third step here, it says 1/4 waist circumference minus 1 centimeter plus 3 centimeters for the dart. So 1/4 of the waist circumference, if we look at the chart, is 68 centimeters. Divide that by 4 equals 17 centimeters. So with the 17, we're going to subtract 1 and add 3. The measurement is already provided for us on this column here, and it's 19 centimeters. So we're going to add the e's to that, which is 0.5 centimeters. So we're going to square across or measure across line A 19.5 centimeters. And that is point A1. And just for your purposes, I'm going to write 19.5 here. From this new point A1, we're going to square up from that point 1 centimeter. And that is A2. So I'm going to put my measurements in brackets so you don't get confused. All right, so we're squaring 1 centimeter up from this point A1 to get point A2. Next, we're going to figure out how wide the hip is, how far across from center back the hip is on the back skirt. The hip circumference measurement is 94 centimeters. So what we need to do is divide that by 4. So 1/4 hip circumference is equal to 23.5. And then it says we're to subtract 1 centimeter, giving us 22.5. And we're going to add a 1/2 centimeter ease, which is a total of 23 centimeters. So from point B at the center back, we will measure across 23 centimeters. And that is point B1. The next step is C to C1. So C is at the bottom of the skirt block, the hem line. I'll shift this up so that you can see it better. Here is point C. It was 59 centimeters down from point A. And we're going to square across that. And point C1 is going to be somewhere around here, and it's going to be exactly the same width or measurement that we measured across the hip line, and that's 23 centimeters. And here's C1. Now we can join points B1 and C1 in a straight line. Basically, it's a rectangle. And then it says that we can use our curve to join point A2 to B1. So in this case, We're going to be using the French curve ruler, and there's many ways to use the French curve and to flip the direction. We could use it this way, or we could choose to use it this way. I am going to recommend that you flip it so that the curvier part of the ruler is at the top of the block, so that this block will accommodate a curvier hip. The way that you use a French curve is we know that we want to join point B1 to A2. So I could start here, and you can see that I want to blend the ruler into my straight lines. So it's blending here, but it's not reaching, my ruler is not reaching A2. So I'm going to shift this up until it reaches A2, and that might be around 31 for as far as I can see. So you can see that the curve of the ruler runs smoothly and blends well with my straight line from B1 going down, and it will hit the point that I want to join at the top here, which is A2. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that. Once again, my curve ruler, the curve measurement at B1 is 31 centimeters. All right, so we've pretty much drafted the side seam, the center back seam, and the hemline of the skirt block for the back skirt. Now we're going to work on the dart. For the dart, it says to measure A to A1 and take half of that. So we know that A to A1 was 19.5. Half of that is 9.8. Here's where I'm going to start using my grid ruler because it's a much shorter line. So I'm going to measure from point A across and measure 9.8 centimeters. So this is point D. We're going to square a line down, and again I'm using my grid ruler. Again, making sure that I use one of the grid lines and accurately place it on this straight waistline, and I am going to measure down, and we're going to square down 14 centimeters. Here's 14. And then we're going to measure 1.5 centimeters on either side of this line. And we're going to join it to the bottom. And that is our dart. Next, we're going to use our curve again. Because the waistline in this block is not going to be straight across, we are going to join A2 here to the first leg of our dart. So consider this E1 at the top of this dart, or E, and this is E1. So once again, you're going to run your curve until it blends into the point that you want to be smooth along this line here. So what I have is measuring 19 centimeters on my French curve at this leg of the dart. And I am going to now draw a line up to point A2. And that is our back skirt block. Now, moving over to the front will be easier because we already have our general waist, hip, and hemline already drafted. So moving to the other side of your block, what we're going to do, and as long as you're at least 60 centimeters over from the center back, we can draft our center front line. So I'm squaring a line either off the hemline or off the waistline. And so I'm going to label this center front. Okay, A to B we already know has been established. That's our hip level. So I'm just going to put these points down. Here's point A, here's point B, and here's point C. Okay, I'm going to start with the waist circumference. Again, the waist circumference in the measuring chart says it's 68 centimeters. That's the waist measurement. A quarter of that is equal to 17. We're going to add 1 centimeter plus 2 centimeters for the dart. So the total is equal to 20 centimeters. And we're going to add the ease of 0.5 centimeters, giving us a total of 20.5. So from point A here, we are going to measure 20.5 centimeters. Actually, I'm going to use the grid here, it's easier. So 20.5. There we go. And that is considered point A3. So here's A, here's A3. And then we're going to square a line up, same as before. We're going to go up 1 centimeter. I'm assuming that's A4. Okay. Now we're going to figure out where the side hip point is. It's 1/4 hip circumference plus 1 centimeter. So hip circumference is 94 centimeters. Divide that by 4 gives us 23.5. Add the 1 centimeter is a total of 24.5. And then we're going to add the 0.5 centimeter ease, giving us a total of 25 centimeters. So I'm going to square across and measure from point B 25 centimeters. Going back here, just so you know, from point A to A3 was 20.5. All right, down at the hem, I'm gonna from C to C2 is going to be exactly the same as the hip. So we're going to measure 25 centimeters. and that point is C2. Now I'm going to join the 2 points. This is the side seam. I'm going to join from the hip line down to the hemline. Oh, the side point at the hip, they're calling B2. All right. Now the same thing, we are going to finish this off by drawing the hip curve. And what we want to consider here is we want to make sure that as much as possible, the hip curve that we drafted on the back, we're going to try and get the same curve here on the front. That will make the sewing of it a lot easier, and you'll have a much nicer shape in the seam. So remember that our hip curve, when we drafted the front, the measurement on our ruler was 31 centimeters at point B1. And we drafted this straight up that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this ruler over and put 31 centimeters here on our skirt front and swing it over until it hits A4. That's the point that is 1 centimeter above the straight waistline. Here's our hip curve. And then the last thing that we want to do is the dart for the front, and then we'll finish it off by drafting the curved waistline. All right, for the dart, we're going to measure from point A, that's at the center front waist here, in to point D. And it says it's 1/4 waist circumference plus 2 centimeters. Waist circumference measurement is 68 centimeters. Divide that by 10 gives you 6.8. And 6.8 plus 2 is 8.8. So we're going to measure 8.8 centimeters from A. We're going to mark that point. That is known as D. And then we are going to square down 10 centimeters. This measurement was 8.8. From point D, we're going to draft a dart that is 1 centimeter on either side of point D. We're going to mark those points. 1 centimeter and 1 centimeter. This is known as E, and this is known as E1. I'm going to join these, the bottom, to get our dart shaping. Sorry, I keep getting that wrong. This is E1, and this side of the dart here is E1. And now we're going to slide our ruler over until the curved ruler blends well with this waistline and hits our point A3. So I would say, just for your purposes, I have my ruler at approximately 25 here on point E1. And that is the end of our draft. That is a size 42 skirt block that we've just drafted. Normally what would happen next is you would trace this onto a thicker piece of paper. This is a draft of your block. You would trace it onto something called manila tag or cardstock. So here I have a used size 42 skirt block. This is manila tag. It's like stiff card. And normally what happens is you would drill a hole in the card. This is your block that you will use to draft very many skirts. Blocks don't have any seam allowance versus pattern pieces for your designs have seam allowance. But normally what happens then is there would be a drill hole that marks the ends of the darts. You would use your pattern notcher to notch the widths of your darts at the waistline. You would notch at the hip line on the side hip, and then you would also draft your hip line onto the cardstock for your final block. A grain line has to be incorporated. In general, your grain line would be marked in red, and it runs parallel to your center front and center back. Then, as far as labeling, in your Fred instructions, there are guidelines on how your blocks should be labeled. So I've made a printout of a label. You're going to identify which block it is first, the piece, and in this case it's the front, or actually this should say back, the size, and then your name. And as far as the way that you want to place these labels, if I were to cut this label out, I'm only going to do the front because obviously I need to change one of these to a back. What you want to do is be cognizant of the direction that these labels go. In every case where pattern pieces are large enough, and this is the same for blocks as well as patterns that you'll be drafting, you want to rotate your pieces so that the bottoms of your pattern pieces are always on the right and the top parts of your pattern pieces are always on the left, and your label will go somewhere close to the bottom and you'll glue this piece on. That's the back skirt, this is the front skirt, and so this is where this label should go. Alright, this is a hole punch done by a rabbit punch, and this is for hanging your blocks and your pattern pieces. So the rabbit hole punch is always located near the bottom of a pattern piece in general. And then what happens is you stack all your pattern pieces together and you place your pattern hook through this hole, and they are then all stacked together and hung on a rack. That's pretty much it. Thank you.